presentation will be that, you know, people will be able to get filled in as it progresses. And feel free to use the chat in Zoom to ask questions. And we'll do our best to direct you or answer those questions as they come up. So welcome everyone to the Back to School information session hosted today by Lyft New York. The session should last until about 7:30 p.m. But obviously it's a free form format. If you can only join for a little bit of time, that's totally understandable. If you've registered, Leah will be should have your information and be able to send you the slides. But you can also contact her, and I'll provide her email later in the presentation. Bienvenidos a todos. Are you translating for yourself, or should I translate for you? Yeah, I'm going to go in now, but I'll let you know if I need to. Let me know. Sure. Yeah. Bienvenido a todos al regreso a la escuela, nuestra sesión informativa que va a durar hasta las 7:30 hoy. Pero si no pueden quedarse para el tiempo entero, está bien. Vamos a tratar de mandar esta información a todos y vamos a tener esa información de contacto ahorita en la presentación. So first, before we get into it, a few things that I want to mention. One is that the information that we're going to provide in this presentation, as it relates to the Department of Education in particular, is a snapshot of the updates provided by the Department of Education in a webinar that they hosted on August 27th, which was last week. And that information is subject to change. There's actually been updates today that we'll go over briefly. And our goal is to continue to provide people with that information. But we do not represent the New York City Department of Education or any government agency. Attendees are encouraged to visit schools.nyc.gov or contact their school principal for specific information on the school. La información en esta presentación es un resumen de la información obtenido por un seminario del Departamento de Educación que ocurrió el 27 de agosto, y esta información puede cambiar en el futuro. El LIFT no representa al Departamento de Educación ni a ninguna agencia del gobierno. Por favor de visitar al website del Departamento de Educación, schools.nyc.gov, o comunicarse con la directora de su escuela para información más específica. So the goals for this info session is to provide Bronx families with up-to-date information and resources for back-to-school well-being, to create a space for questions and answers. Not all of your answers will be, not all of your questions, excuse me, will be answered today, but the goal is to direct you to the appropriate individuals, organizations, agencies.
Hi, good afternoon. This is Angelia's mom, Gloria Aguilar.
Hi, thank you. I also want to mention before anything that there will be opportunities for questions and answers, and we will be explicit about that. So for now, please mute yourselves, but there will be those opportunities throughout the presentation. Thank you. Las metas de esta sesión es a brindar a las familias del Bronx información y recursos actualizados para el bienestar de regreso a la escuela y crear un espacio para preguntas y respuestas. No todas sus preguntas van a recibir una respuesta hoy, pero vamos a tratar de compartir recursos para obtener esas respuestas. Next slide, please. So we have a number of panelists, and we want to thank all of our panelists for making themselves available today. I just want to highlight who is going to be speaking today. We have Monica Major, the Education Director at the Bronx Borough President's Office, as well as, I don't know if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Geneal or Geneal? Geneal Chacon.
You got it, yep.
Yes, there we go. Geneal Chacon, who is on the education policy team, again, at the Bronx Borough President's Office. We have Paula Arboleda, who's Deputy Director of the Public Benefits and LGBTQ Advocacy at Bronx Legal Services. We have Dr. Suzette Brown, who is a pediatrician as well as Chief Operating Officer at Strong Children Wellness. We also have Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda, who is a family psychologist with extensive experience. And then we have, myself, I'm Pedro Suarez, Program Director of Strategic Partnerships here at LIFT New York. So quería también darle información sobre nuestros presentadores hoy. Tenemos Mónica Major, Directora de Educación, y Geneal Chacon, con el equipo de educación en la oficina del presidente del distrito o el condado del Bronx. Tenemos Paula Arboleda, Directora de Beneficios Públicos y Defensa. Can someone help me translate LGBTQ? I'm not sure.
LGBTQ.
Gracias, Petra. At Bronx Legal, en Bronx Legal Services, Servicios Legal del Bronx, tenemos la directora Suzette Brown con Strong Children Wellness. Tenemos también la doctora Luz Towns-Miranda, psicóloga familiar. Y yo soy Pedro Suárez, director del programa de asociaciones estratégicas aquí en LIFT, New York. Y para que no saben, LIFT New York ayuda a familias, específicamente a padres o gente que cuidan a niños entre las edades de 0 a 8 con guianza financiera, personal, educativa y de carrera profesional. For those that don't know, LIFT New York is an organization, a nonprofit organization in the Bronx that helps families with coaching, specifically parents or caregivers with children ages 0 to 8, with achieving their goals around education, career, personal finance. For more information on LIFT, you can visit liftcommunities.org. Para más información sobre LIFT, pueden visitar a nuestra página de web que vamos a tener al fin de esta presentación. So the agenda today, 6 o'clock to 6:10, which is now our introductions, which we've done. I'm going to go into a brief presentation with Department of Education updates that, again, are subject to change. Then we're going to have the Bronx Borough President's Office available to talk about their resources, and people can ask questions about their role and how to stay connected. Dr. Suzette Brown is going to go over Strong Children Wellness and their services for families, as well as some tips and best practices around health and wellness for your children, especially as it relates to COVID. We're going to have as well, Bronx Legal Services is going to be talking about the public benefits available to parents. Hello, public benefits and how to access those public benefits and any questions around that.
Hello.
And then we're also going to have, we're also going to have Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda, who's going to be talking about the household and how to just prepare the household during this difficult time. Mental wellness in general. Hello. Again, please put yourselves on mute. There will be time for questions and answers. Petra, could you just go over quickly the agenda in Spanish?
Sure. So empezaron con una bienvenida que estamos haciendo ahora. Después vamos a dar una información sobre el Departamento de Educación. Después vamos a dar información sobre la oficina del presidente del Distrito Municipal del Bronx. Después información de los servicios legales del Bronx. Tenemos un representante, también tenemos un representante que es una pediatra para dar información sobre eso. Y luego, voy a ponerlo aquí un poco que lo tengo un poco pequeño. Tenemos un psicólogo familiar que nos van a dar una recomendación de información también. Y después al final vamos a tener el espacio para preguntas y compartir otros recursos.
Thank you, Petra. Gracias, Petra. So we're going to go into now some school reopening updates. And again, I just want to preface this by saying that information, was literally coming in today. And there will be information over the next several days and weeks. We have been in communication with the Department of Education. And so as we get information, happy to share it, but you should be proactive about communicating with your principals and the city's website. Quería ahora hablar sobre la reapertura retrasada, también que tiene que ver con información que recibimos hoy. Pero quería decir que la información está llegando a nosotros hoy mismo y durante los próximos días y semanas van a distribuir más información. So, dejan ser en comunicación con su escuela, con la página de web del Departamento de Educación para más detalles. So today, New York City officials announced that school reopenings in person, I want to focus in person, school reopenings have been delayed until Monday, September 21st, which means that remote learning is still starting before then, I believe on the 16th. But for in-person instruction, that's been delayed until September 21st. So the mayor has come to an agreement with the Department of Education and the United Federation of Teachers, and have been able to avoid a strike by delaying the reopening, which will allow for schools to better, to prepare for that reopening. Los funcionarios de la ciudad de Nueva York anunciaron hoy que la fecha de reapertura de la escuela ha sido postergada o retrasada en persona hasta el lunes 21 de septiembre. La ciudad, el Departamento de Educación y la Federación Unida de Maestros por fin ha entrado un acuerdo y estas próximas semanas van a servir para asegurar que las escuelas están listas para la reapertura. Next slide. The information that I'm going to go over today is available online in a video webinar on DOE's website. The link is here. You can watch it yourselves in English, Spanish, and Mandarin, but please continue to visit the website. La información que vamos a revisar hoy está disponible en un seminario en el página de web del Departamento de Educación en inglés, español y mandarín. Pueden visitar a esa página y van a seguir dando y poniendo videos con más información. So I'm not going to go in too much detail, but just give you some highlights. School buildings are currently being inspected for air safety. And those inspections are expected to be completed and posted publicly, the results, by September 4th. Quería también decir que ahora mismo, durante este verano, los edificios de escuelas están abajo de una inspección para asegurar para la seguridad del aire. Y esas inspecciones van a terminar el 4 de septiembre y los resultados de esas inspecciones van a estar disponibles al público. So siguen visitando la página de web del Departamento de Educación para más información sobre esos resultados. Next slide. The Department of Education also just gave some updates on the PPE equipment, protective equipment that they've ordered for schools. And so I just wanted to highlight on this slide what's been ordered, but we have, hand sanitizer, disinfectant wipes, protective equipment, masks, electrostatic sprayers, and schools are expected to have a 30-day supply of these materials at any point in time. Departamento de Educación ha ordenado lo siguiente. No voy a ir en detalle, pero para tener una idea de los artículos que han ordenado para las escuelas en Nueva York, las escuelas siempre deben de tener un suministro para 30 días y deben de reponerse a medida que se agote. Si tienen preguntas sobre esto, ténganse en comunicación con su directora de la escuela para mantener o asegurar que la escuela tiene suficiente artículos de equipo de protección personal. So again, we just want to encourage all parents, caregivers to be in communication with schools around supplies to make sure that they have sufficient supplies, that you're always updated on that information and advocating that that your specific school has sufficient supplies. Next slide. Outdoor spaces, espacios del aire libre. Just a quick note that DOE is working with schools to make outdoor spaces available for those schools that request it. There is an application process, and schools will be receiving a response within a week of submitting that request for use of outdoor spaces like sidewalks, streets, parks, and other public spaces. El Departamento de Educación está trabajando con el Departamento de Transportación y la policía para obtener permisos para usar espacios al aire libre como calles, la acera, parques y otros lugares para estudiantes. Escuelas pueden mandar aplicaciones durante el año entero y recibirán una respuesta dentro de una semana sobre el uso de esos espacios al aire libre. So schools can submit those applications throughout the whole school year. There is no deadline, but the expectation is a 1-week turnaround. So remote learning, aprendizaje remoto. I'm not going to go into detail about remote learning, but the DOE did give us an idea of what to expect, at least for age groups. And so we'll focus on 3K, pre-K, and 5K, just because many of our members, that's the level, the age level of their children. But for more specifics, you should be reaching out to your school. DOE has indicated that parents should be receiving schedules ahead of time for what to expect throughout the day and throughout the week for remote learning. And this just gives you an idea of sort of the types of activities that are expected. And it is expected to be somewhat structured for 3K, pre-K, and 5K. Comuníquense con los principales maestros en un horario de aprendizaje remoto. El horario se ha ajustado según la edad o grado de los estudiantes, y esa es una idea de lo que pueden esperar del calendario remoto. Pero deben de recibir esta información antes que empieza la escuela. So please advocate for this information so that you can prepare and schedule accordingly. Okay, so the final section is really just some ongoing questions that we feel parents and caregivers should keep in mind. And certainly, you'll have the opportunity to ask questions. And after this, we'll hand it off to the Bronx Borough President's office to introduce themselves and take questions. But here are some of the questions that parents should keep in mind. You should know how your school is performed on the building inspections. So please look out for those results, which DOE has indicated should be publicly available after September 4th, or contact the school principal. You should also make sure that your school is receiving PPE supplies equitably. So if there is a lack of resources, or schools are not receiving what they're supposed to be receiving, or they don't have a 30-day supply, you should be communicating that information to the Department of Education, to your local elected officials. If your school is leveraging outdoor spaces, not all schools will be doing that, but if they are making sure that those outdoor spaces are being used safely. Are staff and children understanding and following social distancing guidelines and hygiene protocols? That's an ongoing question that you should continue to ask. What is the breakfast and lunch program of individual schools? DOE has indicated that they'll be providing a cold menu for in-person and takeout, but that students would be eating breakfast and lunch in the classroom itself. So please make sure that your school is aware of any food allergies of the students. Transportation, to date, as far as I know, there are no contracts yet finalized with transportation vendors for school busing, but that is something that Department of Education is continuing to work on. So please look for those updates as DOE disseminates that information. Communicate with principals and teachers on remote learning schedule. Parents should have this information ahead of time. If you want to switch from remote only to blended learning, the information on this process is not going to be available until November. So just keep that in mind and continue communicating with your school. Cuestiones, preguntas que deben de tener pendiente. Los padres cuidadores deben saber cómo se desempeñaron las escuelas en las inspecciones de edificios. Visite la página de web schools.nyc.gov después del 4 de septiembre o comuníquese con el director de la escuela. Otra pregunta que deben de preguntar durante este tiempo entero de la escuela es si están recibiendo los suministros de protección personal de manera equitativa. ¿Están utilizando de forma segura los espacios al aire libre? Deben de preguntar si el personal de la escuela y los niños comprenden y siguen las pautas de distanciamiento social y los protocolos de higiene. I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing it correctly, perdón. ¿Cuál es el programa de desayuno y almuerzo de cada escuela? Deben de hablar con su directora de la escuela para saber esa información y también dejarles saber sobre alergias. Transporte todavía es un trabajo en progreso. No se han consolidado contratos con esas compañías todavía. Comunicarse con los maestros y principales del horario de aprendizaje remoto. Y si quieren cambiar de solo remoto a un programa mixto, tienen que esperar para más información sobre ese proceso en noviembre. All right, so that was a lot of information. I want to now open it up for questions, but before we do that, I want Monica, Major, and Geneal to talk a little bit about their role because they will be taking questions and feedback from the community on back to school. So I'm going to hand it over to her now.
Hey guys. So I think I'm going to go slow and in parts because I have my
I can translate.
Yes.
Thank you.
Okay, so my name is Geneal Chacon. That's about it.
Excellent.
I'm filling in. I'm Monica's Major's. Well, she's my right hand. She's my person to go to as a parent and as a person in my title. Do I pause for that?
Yeah. Mónica Mayor es la mano derecha, como madre, es una persona con quien yo siempre estoy hablando y yo estoy aquí como representante de la oficina de presidente, del Borough de Presidente.
So what is my title? What is my role? Who am I? I was appointed 4 years ago to sit on the then known as the Board of Education, now known as the Panel for Educational Policy.
¿Quién es ella? ¿De dónde viene? Ella fue apuntada hace 4 años de ser parte de, antes se llamaba el Departamento de Educación, ahora se llama el Panel de Educación de Policía Educativa.
So this board basically, as a summary, just to let you know what it is, what we do, it's 15 appointed members, and the chancellor that sits on this board. We meet every month, monthly public meeting, and it is each borough president has one member on that board. The mayor appoints 9 members, and the CECs appoints 1 member.
So este comité se siente 15 personas, you said 15 people?
Correct.
15 personas, que incluye padres, el canciller. If anyone knows, there was the mayor. I don't know how to say mayor. ¿Cómo se dice?
Alcalde.
El alcalde. El alcalde apunta a estas diferentes personas para hacer el comité para estas diferentes escuelas.
So this board basically has approval power of policies. We're policy makers, and things like contracts, co-locations, resolutions, we do it all.
So este comité decide, hace diferentes recomendaciones y policía educativa para recomendaciones sobre qué escuelas van en otros edificios. Si escuelas se cierran o no se cierran, este comité está encargado de hacer esas decisiones.
We have a question in the chat. How can someone be part of this panel? ¿Cómo una persona puede unirse?
I love that question.
Tenemos una pregunta en el chat. Hold on, Cynthia, hold on, let me translate. Hold on. Tenemos una pregunta en el chat que dice que cómo yo puedo ser una persona y ser parte de este comité.
Okay, so someone could be on this panel. I was voted in because I represent the Bronx Borough President. So all of Bronx, I'm the representative on that panel. The parent seat, CECs, the Communication Educational Council of each district. So we have 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, and 12 districts. If you are a part of that district, I suggest you get involved or contact that person who is the CEC members in your district. That's a great way to start.
So ella fue apuntada en esta posición como representante de ser parte de la oficina del Distrito Municipal de Bronx, pero si los padres en que están interesados de ser parte de un comité similar, un comité que se llama Education Council, el concile, I don't know how to say council. How do you say council?
Consejo.
El consejo comunicativo de educación. Cada distrito tiene una posición, yo creo, para ese comité. So, está interesado de ser un representante para hablar con su escuela para buscar más información para ese comité que se llama el CEC, el CEC.
These are awesome questions. I see 2 more in the chat.
I saw it, how can you get in contact? So basically it's CEC, whatever number your district is. So I belong to CEC 7. So I would say CEC 7 at schools.nyc.gov. If you belong to CEC 8, if your district is 8, CEC 8 at schools.nyc.gov. That's how maybe I should just put it in the chat.
Yeah, so if you want to type it in the chat, that would be really great. Si lo pueden poner en el chat, una pregunta, ¿cómo puedo saber de qué clase de comité me pertenece? Depende de su distrito. Si está en el distrito 7, usted le pertenecía del CS7. So, dependiendo de su distrito, vamos a escribir qué es el email, el correo electrónico que ustedes tienen que mandar para poder buscar más información.
Great. I also put the link in the chat of where you can get the information on all the CECs, so that's in there as well.
Thank you. Thank you. So that's a way, and just be involved. Who knows, you might be as lucky as me for your elected official to select you and you be that rep for the whole of the Bronx. But what we're doing now is mainly fighting for our parents and our families to have a safe school reopening. That is on the PEP, Panel Educational Policies agenda.
Ahora mismo estamos el enfoque es para regresar a las escuelas seguras, y también si quieres ser involucrado, que chequear los emails y el correo electrónico que ponemos, chequear con sus escuelas para ver si maybe usted puede ser escogido para ser ese representante para los padres de su distrito.
If you have any concerns other than school reopening, because usually we don't have to fight this fight, right? But if any other issues around education that you have with your child, you can also feel free to contact the Borough President's office. And I'm going to put that in the chat as well, but I'm going to say it. Monica Major's direct line is 718-590-3515.
Que si tienes alguna pregunta o alguna recomendaciones o algún problema que tengan en la escuela de su hijo, puedes alcanzar a Monica Major. Vamos a poner la información en número de teléfono para el representante. Si usted tiene algunas preguntas afuera de asuntos de regreso de la escuela, cualquier cosa puede mandar o puede llamar ese número que vamos a poner en el chat.
And you could always feel free to contact me. I'm an open book, and I will respond as soon as I get it. Chacon, CHACON @schools.nyc.gov.
And the line to, I'm sorry.
Yep.
And the line to Monica.
Hold on. Déjame traducir. So, también si tienes alguna pregunta, puede mandar un email a ella también.
Hello. How you doing? This is Cynthia Henderson.
Somebody was asking a question, no?
Your question?
Yeah, I had a question, Ms. Geneal. This is Alejandra Saul's mommy, by the way.
Hi!
Hey.
Yes.
So I was just curious. I know that now it's a bad way or decision to switch up schools. What if you wanted to switch up schools? Is the district open, or what can be done in this case?
You got to contact, the best way, the quickest way is the direct line between you and your child's school, because everything is all crazy right now. So I suggest to have that direct communication and all of the assistance that you need.
Yeah.
Contact the school directly. Your parent coordinator is your first person. And then if not, the principal.
Let me translate, déjame traducir. So tenemos para la persona. Ahora mismo no es buen tiempo para estar cambiando las escuelas. Es una pregunta si es mal tiempo porque lo que está pasando todo. La recomendación es que por favor hable directamente con la escuela y que busque el coordinador o la coordinadora de padres para buscar directamente.
Hello.
Do you have a question? ¿Tiene una pregunta?
So I was gonna ask. So Ms. Monica is not the right person to speak to in this case.
If it's something specifically with your child for reopening, to get that direct information and that direct assistance, you can contact your school. That's the first step, I would say. If you would like further assistance and you feel like you're not getting that assistance, by all means, feel free to utilize the BP's office, Ms. Monica Major, and utilize myself, because that's where we come in.
Could you give us that number? I missed it. I was trying to put it in the chat.
Sure. 718-590-3515.
718-590-3515.
Remote learning.
1 second. We want to make sure to translate, and we want to make sure to get all of your questions, okay? Just give us a little bit of time before we translate with people. Okay, thank you. So la segunda pregunta era para, se parece que la representante no sería la persona directa para poder preguntar sobre cosas específicamente para reabrir las escuelas. Y la respuesta es no. Si tienes alguna pregunta directamente sobre cómo va a ser el proceso para regresar a las escuelas, para la escuela de su hijo o su hija, hable directamente con la escuela. Si no te están dando respuesta de la escuela, después será una buena sugerencia para contactar la oficina del distrito del Bronx.
And as we also, if they
Can you tell me that information? Please send me that information again.
That we put the email and the phone number in the chat box.
Okay.
I don't know.
Okay, so if there's anything else any updates, we also continuously post on the website, the Bronx Borough President's website. You can also look on that. He has his own page. Everyone knows that the Bronx Borough President is always up and about throughout the Bronx, within the community. So you could always look him up on Instagram. BFTA, they're also doing educational things to help the fathers, and updates on the education page, the Bronx Borough education page on Instagram as well. I'm gonna put those in the chat. You can also look at that as well, because we continually post as soon as we get the information. It kind of helps because I have that direct line. So as soon as I get it, it goes to Instagram and it's posted. In the know.
Vamos a proveer la información. Le está compartiendo que tenemos en el website del Distrito Municipal del Bronx. Ellos ponen rápido la información. Cuando ellos lo reciben, lo ponen en el website, que vamos a poner aquí en el chat. Si tienen algunas preguntas, rápido cuando ellos le dan la información, ellos lo ponen either en el website de ellos, también pueden checar por Instagram. Está también compartiendo que el presidente el director de educación también se parece por diferente en el sitio en el Bronx, o puede ser que sea en tu vecino, sería otra oportunidad para hablar.
Okay, any more questions, concerns, issues? Feel free. I would love the feedback from anyone who has issues or concerns that they'd like to know more about. I know as a parent, I do have my issues and concerns. So feel free to bring it up in the chat throughout the whole. I will be taking notes and I'll be advocating as well as Monica on your behalf.
Algunas preguntas o sugerencias o algo, cualquier información que quieren reportar para atrás y quiere compartir eso con su directora Monica Mayer también. Pueden poner preguntas en el chat o mandarle un email.
All right, so we gave back to school updates at the beginning of this presentation. So in the chat, for those who may have missed it, there's information on where you can find the Department of Education recordings that talk about those updates, but there is new information again this week. In-person school has been delayed to September 21st, so just wanted to reiterate that. Para los que llegaron tarde, tenemos información escrita en el chat sobre información del Departamento de Educación en la reapertura de escuelas en persona está retrasada hasta el 21 de septiembre y la información de la página de web está en el chat. También, Lía, vas a mandar esta información por correo electrónico después que terminamos esta semana a los que daron su información. So I do want to move along. If there's any questions, please put them in the chat and we'll get to them as we come to them. But we're now going to pass the baton to Paula Arboleda, Deputy Director of Public Benefits and LGBTQ Advocacy, Bronx Legal Services. Paula Arboleda, Subdirectora de Beneficios Públicos y la Defensa de la Comunidad de LGBTQ.
Buenas tardes, todo el mundo. Un gusto estar aquí con ustedes. Mi nombre es Paula. Good afternoon. It's great being here with you. My name is Paula. As Pedro mentioned, I'm with Bronx Legal Services. I'm the Deputy Director in the Public Benefits Unit. Como indicó Pedro, yo soy la subdirectora de la División de Beneficios Públicos en la organización Servicios Legales del Bronx. So I'm going to be talking a little bit today about what our organization does, what my department does, and then I will talk about pandemic EBT for those of you with school-age children. So Bronx Legal Services is a large civil legal services organization. We represent individuals in all sorts of area of law, housing, family, immigration, consumer, public benefits, healthcare, education, etc. And we have a hotline available for anyone who's experiencing legal issues in those areas to call our organization to see if they can get free legal assistance. And I will put the number to our hotline in the chat. Voy a empezar a hablar principalmente sobre la organización Bronx Legal Services y el tipo de organización que es y los temas que trata. Nosotros somos una organización legal que trabaja con clientes de bajos recursos que necesitan asistencia legal en ciertas áreas como vivienda, casos de familia, casos de migración, casos de consumidor, casos de educación, casos de beneficios públicos, acceso a seguro médico y también servicios de una home attendant o ayudante en el domicilio. Nuestros servicios son gratuitos y tenemos una línea de asistencia disponible para que usted pueda llamarnos si tiene un tema o pregunta legal que es referente a estos temas legales. En el chat, en un ratico, voy a poner el número de la línea de asistencia por si usted lo necesita ahora o en el futuro. Al final voy a hablar un poquito de beneficios de pandemia EBT, pero ahora voy a empezar a hablar sobre pandemia EBT en inglés primero. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about pandemic EBT, since I know all of you here have children or school-age children. So pandemic EBT began because, oh, thank you, Pedro. So we have some Know Your Rights materials in English and Spanish about pandemic EBT, so don't feel like you have to take notes. It's 2 or 3 pages, and it's going to walk you through what they are and when you should have received them or expect to receive them. So pandemic EBT became available to children who were receiving reduced or free school lunch and would have received that lunch if the schools had not closed because of COVID-19. So that includes children between the ages of 5 and 18 years of age. It includes children ages 3 and 4 who are enrolled in pre-kindergarten or pre-K. It includes New York City public school children, children enrolled in parochial schools or charter schools. It also includes children ages 19 to 21 who are still enrolled in school, foster children, and again, you would be eligible for pandemic EBT without applying. It's really based on the age of your child and whether they would have qualified for reduced or free lunch if they had been in school and the schools had not closed due to COVID. So for each eligible child in your household, each child would receive $420. $420 represents the amount, sort of the dollar amount for the school lunch that your child would have received if they had continued to go to school in person. You don't have to apply for these benefits. You will automatically receive those benefits. As you can imagine, especially in New York City, there would be tens of thousands of parents who would be receiving these benefits for their school-age children. So New York State is sending out the benefits to the parents in 3 groups or 3 waves. So the first wave of individuals is called Group 1. So anyone who had a child age 5 through 18 years of age and had been receiving cash assistance, SNAP, as of March 2020, those parents would have already been issued pandemic EBT benefits in the same card they used for SNAP in May of 2020. Okay, so Group 1 should have already received the benefits. You should have received a letter. A lot of parents may not have noticed that they received these pandemic EBT benefits because it would have just been added to your SNAP card. So you might have been using it at the supermarket and not realize that you had received these additional benefits. But if you have any questions or doubts about that, you can always contact us, or you can review your benefits on Access HRA, okay, which is a website that HRA uses that is free, that you can create an account to see what cash assistance and SNAP benefits your family is receiving, and those will show up in your payment history. The pandemic EBT benefits would show up in your payment history if they've already been issued to you. So that's group one. Group one should have already gotten them. Group two is for individuals who have children ages 3 to 18 who are receiving Medicaid only, so not cash, not food stamps. They were just receiving Medicaid health insurance and no other benefit. They should have received their pandemic EBT benefits by the end of July. So the really important thing is that you would have received the letter indicating that you will not be receiving pandemic EBT benefits. So if you think you're in group 2 and you haven't received the letter, you might be receiving your benefits in group 3, and I'll talk about that in a second. But really the most important part is that letter is what tells you when the benefits have been issued to your family, and then follow the steps to access the benefits. Until you receive that letter, there are very limited options available to you to inquire as to when you're gonna get them. But we describe the groups in the material so that if you think you were in group 1 and clearly you should have gotten them in May, you never got them, or you definitely believe you were in group 2 and you haven't received them or a letter, and think you don't belong in group 3, then that's when you would be calling our hotline so we can figure out the particular situation that you're in and see if there's a way to find this out on your behalf. Keep going, I'm sorry. And then group 3 is the last group. That group includes eligible children ages 3 to 18, again, receiving reduced or free lunch, who did not receive cash assistance, SNAP, or Medicaid, and also for students ages 19 to 21 with a disability, regardless of whether they receive cash or SNAP. Okay, and the group 3 will receive their benefits now, starting in August through the end of September. So for group 3, again, you're waiting for that letter. If it's towards the end of September and you haven't received the letter or the benefits, then you should definitely be in touch with our office because there could be an issue or inquiries might have to be made. The rest of the information walks you through how do you, if you do receive your letter and you do have an EBT card or the special card that you use to access these benefits, how do you actually use the card and set up your PIN so you can take advantage of pandemic EBT benefits that have been deposited in the card. I'm not gonna go into details with how to actually, create your PIN and all of that information. That's in our materials and you can, walk through it yourself. Of course, if you attempt to do this yourself at home and you're not able to create a PIN or you have some other barrier that keeps you from being able to use the benefits and you receive the letter, then of course that's something you should be contacting us about so we can help you in your particular case.
Just want to point out there's a question in the chat.
Okay, so someone asked, will there be another round of pandemic EBT benefits issued to children receiving public benefits or Medicaid? So my my partner in crime, Jack, he's the director of my unit, he answered, which is we don't know what steps Congress is going to take. So I know that Pedro had already mentioned that school is delayed in person until September 21. So potentially there could be an authorization for pandemic EBT benefits, but that has not been disclosed or announced as of yet. So right now, the max you can get based on what was approved prior is $420 per child. We would have to wait for a new announcement from Congress, whether that will also happen again if school closings and remote learning is what's going to take place in states across the country.
¿Podemos también traducir esa pregunta?
Oh, yes.
Gracias.
Oh, you know what? I'll translate it when I get to the Spanish portion.
Okay, great.
Yeah. Okay, so, ahora voy a hablar un poquito sobre pandemia EBT para los padres que están aquí con nosotros. Pandemia EBT está disponible para familias que tienen niños de edades entre 3 y 18 años de edad que calificaban para almuerzos reducidos o gratuitos y que hubieran recibido esos almuerzos si las escuelas no hubieran cerrado a causa de la pandemia. Pandemia EBT no es un beneficio que necesita que usted aplique, ¿ok? Solo es disponible automáticamente para esas familias en 3 grupos diferentes que califican para almuerzos reducidos o gratuitos. No importa si va a una escuela en el condado de Nueva York o una escuela religiosa o parroquial o un charter school. Mientras usted califique para almuerzos reducidos o gratuitos, usted va a calificar para beneficios de pandemia EBT. ¿Ok? Eso también incluye niños de edades 3 y 4 que están en programas pre-kinder. Incluye también niños de edades 19 a 21 con discapacidades y todavía están en las escuelas bachillerato. También incluye niños en cuidado sustituto. Y es muy, muy importante, especialmente en nuestra comunidad latina, que los beneficios que reciben de pandemia EBT no importa si los niños tienen estatus inmigratorio y no afecta el estatus inmigratorio ni de los niños ni de los parientes, ¿ok? Es un beneficio que puede recibir sin ninguna preocupación. Ahora, cada niño que califique para estos beneficios recibirá 420 por niño. Hay 3 grupos porque hay muchas personas en los condados de Nueva York, entonces tienen que distribuir los beneficios en 3 fases. El grupo primero son para niños de edades 5 a 18, en las cuales están recibiendo asistencia pública o cupones de alimento desde el mes de marzo de este año. Si usted está en un caso de asistencia pública y cupones de alimento y en marzo tenía ese caso activo, entonces los beneficios de pandemia EBT hubieran sido depositados en su tarjetita de cupones de alimento en mayo de este año. ¿Ok? Puede que esos beneficios hubieran sido depositados en varios depósitos. Lo que yo he visto es que no han sido depositados $420 beneficios de una, sino han sido divididos en varios pagos. Tiene que tener que mirarlos para asegurarse que sí recibió la cantidad correcta. Si usted o no tiene asistencia pública o cupones de alimento o calificó para esos beneficios después de marzo 2020, usted va a estar en categorías o grupo 2 o 3. Grupo 2 es específicamente para las familias que tienen niños con edades de 3 a 18 años que después de marzo solo tenían, el único beneficio que tenían era seguro médico debajo de Medicaid, ¿ok? Esos niños que tenían Medicaid nada más y ningún otro beneficio hubieran recibido los beneficios de pandemia EBT a finales de julio. Cada grupo, para saber si ya le han depositado sus beneficios, van a recibir una carta que les informa a las familias que esos beneficios han sido depositados. Si hasta en este momento no ha recibido una carta, puede que usted esté en el grupo número 3. El grupo número 3 va a recibir esos beneficios empezando en agosto hasta finales de este mes. Ese grupo incluye niños de edad 3 a 18 años de edad que no reciben ni asistencia pública, ni cupones, ni Medicaid, niños de 19 a 21 años de edad con discapacidades y el resto de las personas en grupo 1 y 2 que no lo han recibido. Entonces es muy importante que estén al tanto de recibir esa carta, porque esa carta es la que les va a informar que los beneficios $420 por niño están disponibles para usted usarlos. Estos materiales que Pedro está mostrando aquí en la pantalla tienen más información de qué, después de recibir la carta, cómo puede accesar los beneficios. Y te da información dependiendo de si ya tienes una tarjetica EBT o si todavía no tienes la tarjetica y qué ocurre cuando qué debes de hacer cuando la recibes por correo, si estás en grupo 2 o grupo 3, o si tienes una pero la perdiste y necesitas un reemplazo. Obviamente, si tú recibiste la carta informándote que esos beneficios van a ser depositados, recibiste la tarjetica, pero por alguna razón no puedes hacer un PIN que te dé acceso a usar esa tarjetica en el supermercado, debes de llamar a nuestra línea de asistencia para nosotros asesorar tu caso individualmente, a ver si podemos ayudarte. O si estás en grupo 3 o grupo 1 y piensas que ya estabas supuesto recibir los beneficios y nunca los recibiste, también puedes llamar a nuestra línea de asistencia. Pero el factor más importante es la carta que te informa que esos beneficios están disponibles. Yo en el chat, en un momentico, voy a poner el número de nuestra línea de asistencia que pueden usar, como les expliqué antes, con preguntas sobre EBT pandemia o si tienen otros casos legales en las otras áreas que nosotros cubrimos.
Thank you, Paula. I really appreciate it. Just to make sure that we keep in time, please continue to send questions in the chat. All of our panelists should be able to respond and provide information. So please leverage that. And again, we will follow up if anyone's questions have not been answered. I now want to hand it off to our next presenter, Dr. Suzette Brown. And if you can please try to stick to 10 minutes for this so that we can just keep with the time and have enough time for questions at the end. But I'll hand it off to Suzette Brown, who's with Strong Children Wellness.
Thank you, Pedro, for that introduction. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yes.
Great. So as Pedro mentioned, I'm Dr. Suzette Brown. I'm a pediatrician with Strong Children Wellness. Just briefly, Strong Children Wellness partners with community organizations to address families' health needs, mental health needs, and social needs. Don't know if you want to translate that.
Hey, Petra, can you get that part? To the rest, I was reading something.
I can translate, and then Son, if you want to kick it over there. So la organización Strong Children Wellness trabaja con otras comunicaciones para asegurar de los niños. Ella, de la doctora Suzette Brown, es una pediatra. So nos va a dar más información.
Thank you. So I wanted to just talk briefly about the latest guidelines and recommendations around returning to school during the pandemic, and talk a bit about what we know right now about COVID-19 in kids, and then talk briefly about the New York City DOE guidelines relating to what happens if your child gets sick in school or is sick at home, and what sort of the guidelines are around returning to school after an illness. So I'll start by just talking briefly about what we know about COVID-19 in kids.
Ok, entonces vamos a usar este momento para hablar sobre las guianzas para el regreso de niños a la escuela, lo que conocemos del COVID-19, y ahora mismo vamos a enfocarnos en el área de los niños.
Thank you. So we know that COVID-19 in kids is generally milder than it is in adults. Typically, kids who have COVID-19 symptoms often have a fever. They can have diarrhea and vomiting, body aches, chest pain. They might lose their sense of smell or taste. They might have a cough, and occasionally that cough can progress to shortness of breath. They may also have headache and rash.
Ok, so aquí conocemos que los síntomas del COVID le dan menos a los niños. Y aquí voy a compartir un pronto en español. Un momento, para que vean los síntomas. Los síntomas de COVID-19 incluyen fiebre, diarrea, vómitos, dolores corporales, dolor de pecho, pérdida de olfato, gusto, tos, dificultad para respirar, dolor de cabeza, erupción.
And it's important to note that kids who have more complex medical problems, so for example, a child who has congenital heart disease or neurologic problems, those kids might have more severe illness than a kid who does not have those underlying problems.
Hay que entender que los niños que tienen problemas ya severos, o sea, problemas que han tenido antes del COVID, pueden presentar síntomas más graves del COVID-19.
It's also important to note that infants less than 12 months might present a little bit differently with COVID-19 symptoms. Sometimes all you see with babies less than 12 months of age who may have COVID is difficulty feeding, they may have a fever, and then they may also have respiratory symptoms as well. But often the respiratory symptoms are minimal.
Los síntomas que conocemos de los infantes menor de 12 meses son dificultad para alimentarse, fiebre, y los síntomas respiratorios pueden ser mínimos.
We have a question in the chat. Are nasal swabs the only way to test children? I'm not sure how to say that in Spanish, Sena.
La pregunta que tenemos que han presentado es si la única manera de hacer la prueba a los niños es con el hisopo nasal.
So currently, nasal swabs are the most common way to test kids and adults in New York and across the United States. However, the FDA just approved about 2 weeks ago a saliva test, a rapid saliva test for COVID-19, where essentially all kids have to do is provide a saliva sample in a little container, and that can be tested with results in as little as 3 hours. That test is not widely available at the moment. It's only available in select laboratories, but we anticipate that over the course of the next month, that test is going to be much more widely available and an option for kids.
La manera más común en este momento de hacerle las pruebas a los niños es con el hisopo nasal, pero hace 2 semanas el FDA aprobó una prueba que es a base de la saliva, en el cual da resultados en unas 3 horas, pero ahora mismo no es muy común.
So the American Academy of Pediatrics, which is the national pediatric organization that provides guidelines for how we care for kids, they recommend that students should be physically present in school if at all possible and when it's feasible. What they say is that there are risks to kids' mental health, to their learning, and there are also other risks if they're not in school for at least part of the week. However, there's an understanding that in many cases, remote learning may be a better option for kids. However, the recommendation is where at all possible kids do have some in-person learning as well.
Put up the slide for that. El AAP aboga porque los estudiantes estén físicamente presentes en la escuela, porque los riesgos del aislamiento social para la salud mental, el aprendizaje, la seguridad alimentaria y el abuso, negligencia infantil.
And if you can go back to the English version of that slide. We know that face masks, that physically distancing kids, placing desks 6 feet apart, for example, that proper hand hygiene, that having appropriate ventilation and cleaning and disinfecting surfaces frequently substantially lowers the risk of transmission of COVID-19. We also know, based on many studies that have been done over the course of the last 4 or 5 months, that kids less than 10 years of age are less likely to transmit the virus.
Conocemos que el uso de las mascarillas, igual que el distanciamiento físico, la higiene de manos, lavarse las manos, ventilación apropiada, la limpieza y la desinfección ayuda muchísimo en bajar el riesgo de transmisión. Y también hemos aprendido en los últimos 4 o 5 meses que los niños que son menor a 10 años son menos propensos a transmitir el virus.
Next slide. But, you know, the decision to go in person versus remote obviously is one that parents have to make based on a number of factors. I've listed some of those factors here. Some of the keys are to be comfortable with your school's reopening plan. And as was mentioned before, on the New York City DOE site, there's a lot of information about the steps and precautions that schools are taking to, with respect to reopening. There's also certain child considerations. So is your child going to be able to tolerate a face mask throughout the day? You know, there's also, you know, a question of whether your child would be able to access a lot of the specialized services. If they have an IEP, for example, will they be able to access those services remotely versus their ability to access them in person? And then there's the feasibility of remote learning. Like if a parent has to work, then in person may be the only option. So all of these things have to be taken into consideration. And at the end of this talk, I'll share some resources to help with making that decision. Most parents have already made the decision at this point, but for those who are still considering whether to go from remote to in-person, there's guidance on sort of how to think about making that decision.
Ciertos padres ya han tomado la decisión sobre si desean que sus hijos reciban aprendizaje en persona versus remoto, pero la toma de decisiones está basada en ciertos factores, como por ejemplo, la comodidad que usted siente con el plan de regreso a la escuela de su hijo, los cuales están publicados en la página de internet del Departamento de Educación, al igual que consideraciones del niño, por ejemplo, si va a poder lavarse las manos, si va a poder mantener la distancia con sus amiguitos. Otros factores son acceso a servicios especializados basados en la escuela, por ejemplo, cosas que el niño no puede recibir en su casa. Y finalmente, la viabilidad del aprendizaje remoto. Por ejemplo, si el papá está trabajando, ¿cómo va a manejar la educación remota? Y se va a dar más información más tarde sobre los factores.
I just want to highlight 2 questions in the chat. The first question is in Spanish. ¿Cómo se puede proteger a un niño menor de 2 años? Y si es posible que pueden transmitir el virus. How do you protect a child younger than 2 and can they transmit the virus? We'll start there.
That's actually a really good question. So kids under the age of 2 are not really able to wear a mask safely when they travel outdoors, so or outside of the home. So the best way to protect them is to do careful hand washing, to clean and disinfect surfaces that are high touch frequently. And for others in the home, parents, older siblings, who have symptoms of COVID-19, so cough, fever, others, the symptoms that I mentioned earlier, it's best where at all possible to try to keep them sort of physically distant and in as much as possible to have them sort of wear a mask in the home if they're symptomatic. So those are.
Can I translate real quick?
Absolutely.
Okay, thanks. So esa es muy buena pregunta. Los niños menores de 2 años es muy difícil que mantengan su mascarilla puesta seguramente en la calle. Entonces, lo mejor que se puede hacer es asegurarse que haya buena higiene, que se laven bastante las manos. También que áreas donde los niños vayan a tocar mucho se desinfecten constantemente y que los adultos que estén en el hogar que tengan síntomas de COVID se mantengan usando la mascarilla a todo momento.
Thank you. I just want to step in and do a time check. Give Suzette just a chance to wrap up. If there's any key points that you want to say really quickly before we pass it along to our next presenter.
Absolutely. So just quickly, it's important to note the symptoms that would prevent your child from going to school. And these can be found on the Department of Education website as well. So if your child has a fever above 100 in the past 14 days, it's recommended that they do not go to school. If there's known exposure to anyone who has COVID or has COVID symptoms in the past 10 days, that's another reason to keep your child home. If they've had a positive COVID test within the past 10 days, or if there's been international travel or travel to a state where there's widespread community transmission within the past 14 days, it's recommended that your kids stay home. And what the general recommendation is that you essentially have to quarantine for 10 days if your child has symptoms or has been around somebody who is COVID positive. If your child is COVID positive, then they essentially also have to quarantine for 10 days at home until they have no symptoms at all. So they have to be fever-free for more than 3 days. They have to have no cough, no any other COVID symptoms, no symptoms at all, in addition to quarantining for the 10 days.
Ok, entonces hay ciertos síntomas por la cual los niños no deberían ir a la escuela. Esos incluyen tener fiebre mayor de 100 grados en los últimos 14 días, tener alguna exposición conocida a cualquier persona que tenga COVID o que esté sintomática en los últimos 10 días, o también que haya recibido una prueba positiva en los últimos 10 días, o que haya viajado internacionalmente o desde un estado con transmisión comunitaria los últimos 14 días. Y también ya después es bueno que tome una cuarentena por 10 días y que tenga 3 días sin tener una fiebre alta para poder volver.
I'll stop here, but at the very end, I list some resources for parents that they can sort of take a look at to get more information.
Great. Thank you so much, Dr. Suzette Brown. Again, she's with Strong Children Wellness. Please feel free to share your resources and contact information in the chat. Any questions that are not answered right now, we'll try to get to at the end, or certainly connect you to the appropriate individuals.
Do you want me to translate or do you want to translate?
I could do it. Aquí hay ciertos recursos para la salud en el regreso a la escuela, los cuales le vamos a mandar creo que por el chat y también por correo electrónico luego de esta reunión.
Thank you. Okay, so now we're going to move on to our next presenter, Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda, who is a family psychologist with extensive experience in the community, I believe over 25 years working with residents in the Bronx, but also throughout the 5 boroughs and beyond. Very, very active in the community. So we want to now turn it over to Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda to share some information on resiliency and structuring the household. Ahora vamos a dar el espacio para la doctora Luz Towns-Miranda para hablar sobre su experiencia como psicóloga familiar y su experiencia en el Bronx y información sobre resiliencia y estructuración del hogar.
Good evening, everybody. I'm Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda, and I have some very basic information for you that should help in terms of moving forward with this school year. Yo soy la doctora Miranda y le voy a proveer ciertos factores que van a ser muy importantes para poder llevar a cabo este año escolar. Primero, first, it'll be important that you begin to establish routines for a couple of reasons. It is what establishes predictability and trust and comfort for children, because just like adults, children like to know what to expect. And if they know what time they're going to get up, what time they're going to eat breakfast, what time they're going to leave for school or start Zooming, what time they're going to have dinner, what time they're going to go to bed, and actually have a time where, like, I know a child who, if he was a preschooler, if it was 7 o'clock, he would run and say, "Mommy, it's my bedtime. I got to get to bed. It's my bedtime." So kids do internalize a good structure and feel very comforted by it. La primera cosa que es importante establecer en un hogar es una rutina. Como a nosotros nos gusta saber lo que va a pasar en el día de cada uno, a los niños también es importante que ellos sepan a qué hora se van a levantar, a qué hora van a desayunar, a qué hora van a empezar la escuela, sea en la casa o salir a la escuela, a qué hora van a cenar, a qué hora se van a acostar, lavar los dientes, acostarse a dormir. Y en la medida que los niños sepan y reconozcan, yo conozco un nene de kinder que cuando eran las 7, porque es la hora de dormir, lo veía en la caja del cable y decía: "Mami, ya se me pasó la hora, ya son las 7:05, me tengo que ir a acostar a dormir". Eso le da mucha seguridad a los niños y poder estar confiante de que hay una estructura es muy importante para los niños. Y eso va mano en mano con la estructura. So to the extent that, and this is really hard for some families because of overcrowding, to the extent that the household is structured in a way that children know that they're going to eat dinner at a table, they have a select place to do their homework, and that they can count on having things organized in their little space. It's very important. Los niños también necesitan su propio espacio y reconocer dónde van a ocurrir las cosas. Si hay una mesa donde todas las noches o por la mañana comen, eso sería importante. Tener donde ellos pueden hacer su trabajo de la escuela, donde, o si es la computadora hoy en día, dónde va a estar localizada, cosa que va a poder concentrar y enfocarse en el trabajo que le han dado en la escuela. Así que esas cosas, la estructura y la rutina aseguran a un niño que él puede contar y predecir lo que va a pasar de un día para otro. So those two things go really hand in hand. Structure and routine are very reassuring to children. Esas dos cosas aseguran a los niños que las cosas van bien en el hogar porque pueden contar con eso día tras día. Pero además de eso, in addition to that, children have been powerfully affected by this lockdown, mental health-wise. So it's important for parents to recognize what their kids' normal functioning is, which is called the baseline. How do they typically sleep? How do they typically eat? How do they typically play? How do they typically socialize? Because if you see deviations from those baseline manners of being, the kid might be in trouble. I've fielded questions for people over these last few months of kids stopping contacting friends, refusing to go to sleep and playing video games all night and then not being able to function during the day, not eating too much or too little. Those signs that are, those are the two basic ones we look for often, which are big signs of depression. The eating and the sleeping, as well as for children socializing. When those things begin to drop off, it signals that the child may be in, psychological distress. And we've all been in psychological distress. Así que la otra cosa que es sumamente importante para los padres es reconocer el nivel de funcionamiento normal de su niño. Normalmente cómo come, cómo duerme, con quién se hace amistad y cómo juega, porque cuando los niños se empiezan a deprimir o ponerse demasiado ansiosos, por lo regular, o no pueden dormir, o duermen demasiado, o tienen dificultad comiendo, o comen demasiado, o paran de comunicarse con amigos, o hacen cosas como jugar juegos toda la noche y no poder funcionar durante el día. Cuando uno ve que hay un cambio dramático de la manera de que el niño normalmente funciona, uno tiene que empezar a buscar ayuda de salud mental y o depender, poner en pie la estructura y la rutina, pero por lo regular han habido niños que se han deprimido muchísimo bajo estas condiciones y que necesitan ayuda adicional. During this lockdown, kids have suffered tremendously because there's been such an abrupt and dramatic disruption in their usual normal levels of play and interaction and activities. And kids get sad and kids get very depressed. And if you notice that your child is struggling, if you don't have it addressed, you're going to struggle with their schoolwork, because depressed and anxious kids have tremendous difficulty concentrating. Depression and anxiety, one of the key symptoms is impaired concentration. So they're really going to be struggling in school, in addition to the emotional distress. Una de las cosas que si los niños empiezan a sufrir de salud, de condiciones como depresión y ansiedad, van a tener tremenda dificultad concentrándose, porque una síntoma clave de depresión y ansiedad es la incapacidad de poder concentrarse en cuestiones escolares. So that's my spiel. I know that we are a little behind schedule, but those are huge and really important. Yo sé que es breve, pero esas tres cosas son sumamente importantes: rutina, estructura y el nivel de funcionamiento normal de su hijo.
Dr. Luz, one thing that I did want to bring up, I don't know if you wanted to give any tips just for parents themselves around their own mental wellness and well-being. Is there anything that you want to shed light on or discuss?
Well, all of that applies to them as well. I think people have struggled with how to cope in this unusual time, and parents need to be checking themselves out in terms of their own baseline and how they're being impacted, because you can't take care of others unless you take care of yourself first. It's kind of like in the airplane, you got to get the mask and then put it on the kid. You have to make sure you're doing well. La verdad que los padres también tienen que chequearse ellos mismos, porque esta cuestión ha tenido tremendo impacto sobre los padres. Ha sido una carga demasiada, especialmente con los niños en la casa todo el tiempo. Así que en la medida que uno se cuida, es capaz de cuidar a los niños. Así que hay gente que ha necesitado conseguirse medicamentos, no necesariamente psiquiátricos. La mayoría de los antidepresivos que son escritos en este país son por los doctores primarios de uno. So, if you're feeling acutely depressed or anxious, you don't have to go to a mental health clinic. Primary care doctors are the primary prescribers of antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication throughout the country. It doesn't mean you have to go to a mental health clinic, especially given these circumstances, which are so unusual.
Thank you so much. We also have some resources that Dr. Luz Towns-Miranda shared with us that we'll put up on a slide. But we really appreciate her feedback and all of our presenters' feedback on really how to deal with this difficult time. Gracias a la doctora Luz Towns-Miranda para esta información, y a todos nuestros presentadores. Ahora mismo estamos poniendo información sobre recursos adicional sobre la bienestar que pueden accesar sobre el websites de estos recursos. pero también ahora mismo es el tiempo de poner sus preguntas en el chat y también dejarnos saber si tienen preguntas para la doctora y los otros presentadores. Now's the time to really put your questions into the chat as well, or speak up and let us know any questions that you have for any of our presenters. And again, we have about 10 minutes for this. But if any follow-up needs to happen, we'll do that. Si no podemos tener una respuesta para sus preguntas, podemos también conectar a ustedes, a nuestros presentadores y también a otros recursos.
There's a question about where can parents ask for mental health help for their children. Pediatricians often refer to mental health clinics depending on the severity of their concerns, but they can also address antidepressants, say for adolescents, without having to go to a mental health clinic. So it depends on the experience of the pediatrician or family practice doc, because family medicine docs take care of everybody, not just children or adults.
Could you translate, Dr. Luz?
Para las personas que alguien preguntó a quién uno debe de preguntarles si tiene preocupaciones sobre el salud mental de los niños. El pediatra o el doctor médico de los niños deben de poder referir a los padres a un centro para niños, o el doctor mismo puede recetar cosas dependiendo de cuán severo él sienta que la situación es.
And yes, we also have, a pediatrician here today that can certainly speak on how she approaches those issues as well, if she'd like to talk about that as well.
Absolutely. We've been screening all of our patients and parents for mental health issues, particularly during this time when we know that there's been a lot of stress created as a result of this pandemic. So every child who we see gets screened for a mental health issue. And if, as Dr. Luz said, it's moderate to severe, and the child would benefit from psychotherapy, we typically refer to our community partners who provide mental health services. If the child would benefit from medication, that's something that we as pediatricians, as Dr. Luz mentioned, prescribe often. Or we, for those who don't feel comfortable prescribing psychiatric medications, we would refer to a psychiatrist to manage that. But yes, we definitely, I think the first line is to start with your child's pediatrician if you're concerned about their behavior, or their emotional health, and the pediatrician should do screening to determine how severe the issue is and make the necessary referrals if needed.
And I also think it's very important to take this seriously, because there have been suicides among children and adolescents in the lockdown that was predictable from severe withdrawing from activities and from and basically shutting down. La verdad que no tomen como algo leve la cuestión de depresión o ansiedad entre niños. Han habido suicidios entre niños y adolescentes durante este periodo, y que se pudo haber predecido porque el niño para de tener contacto con amigos y cambia en comportamiento severamente.
Thank you. So are there any remaining questions from folks in the chat? We're also going to put Leah's contact information where you can send your questions and she can compile them, and then we'll figure out the best way to direct you. Si tienen preguntas, por favor de dejarnos saber. Vamos a poner la información de Leah Rudiger en el chat para mandar sus preguntas y nosotros podemos referirlos a la persona que puede ayudar. Well, thank you everyone for attending our back to school info session. Thank you to all of our panelists and presenters for providing their expertise, their support. We just want everyone to know that the purpose of this info session, and one of the reasons that LIFT exists, is to provide support to the Bronx community, but specifically to parents during this difficult time. And so we are here to help direct you to the resources that you need. Gracias a todos para estar aquí hoy, a todos nuestros presentadores. Estamos aquí para ayudar a ustedes y referirlos a nuestros socios en la comunidad y la gente que tienen los recursos para ayudarle durante este tiempo difícil. So thanks everyone. Have a good night. Have a good week. Stay in touch. Support one another. Quedarse en comunicación. Apoyar a todos nosotros. Que esto es algo que tenemos que hacer como una comunidad. This is something that we have to deal with as a community. Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you very much. Bye-bye.
Gracias.
Bye.
Gracias, excelente conferencia. Gracias a cada uno de los participantes.
Gracias, Marta.
Gracias. We'll just hold on tight until everyone logs off in case there's remaining questions.
You're on mute, Petra.
I said it's such a sad recording. Everyone's just like leaving. Should I stop? Let me stop this thing.